Good evening, folks. I'd like to talk to you about books, but it's raining. Let's go somewhere more comfortable. Folks, here I am doing a video for YouTube. I wanted to do this, and after a recent conversation with my friend Wizard Jim of News from the Gelding, link below, I've decided to give it a go in a very short way, just to do a quick look at a particular book. And it's September. It's the last day of September today, so this is my last chance to do it. And for Cimmerian September, which was I believe started by Michael K. Vaughan, link below, I thought I'd talk about this book. This is Robert E. Howard's Sowers of the Thunder, and it's a 1977 Sphere paperback. It's not in great condition. You can see it's had labels picked off and so on. But it's a really nice little collection of 4 longer short stories by Howard. And it has some useful information. It tells you, for example, when each of the 4 stories were published and what they appeared in. There are 2 magazines, I think, Magic Carpet magazine and Oriental Stories are the 2 pulp magazines that they would have originally appeared in the 1933 and 1932. I'll say it right off. It's a wonderful volume. I've read Howard since I was a teenager. Obviously, I first got into Conan, they're up here behind me, collection, and then later on into his mythos tales and his horror stories, which are also superb. He's just a class writer. And yet, there's almost juvenilia that's published by him, which feels like juvenilia in some ways. But when you get to this, like the Elborak series, they're not as well known as Conan, which are great, but they're equally good, many of these. So I'm going to talk very briefly about it. So the first story in the collection is The Lion of Tiberias. And I'm not going to tell you the entire plot of each of the stories, but the story, The Lion of Tiberias, all of these stories are linked, of course, I should have said this, by they're set in the Middle East or the Near East, and range across time from, I think, the 13th century through to the 17th, 16th, 17th centuries. So The Lion of Tiberias begins with a character called John Norwald, who's an Englishman of Danish stock, and he has been working as a mercenary and a sellsword, and he knows defeat in battle. And at the end of this particular battle, he's slighted by the enemy, the main protagonist, the Lion of Tiberias, a chap called Zengi. And now Zengi is enslaves Norwald. He claps him in irons and sends him off as a galley slave. And we don't hear from him for a while. Then we're introduced to another character, Miles de Courcy. Now, de Courcy is as a knight who's embittered from betrayals and so on, and ends up discovering a spy and takes his place effectively, and inveigles himself in the court of the great enemy of Christendom in the Middle East, the court of this Zengi or Zhengi. What stands out about this first story and subsequent stories in this collection, specifically this collection, is Howard's mastery of writing conflict, battlefield action. So I'm not going to give any more about the story, except that there's a wonderful resolution at the end with the initial protagonist, Norwald. He comes staggering back in, like a nemesis at the end, and it's great. It's really great. But I'll read you a very short piece from this, and you'll get a taste of how Howard's prose does battle. Miles, so this is our crusader Miles de Courcy. Miles showed his appreciation in action, not words. In the fighting on the walls, in the slaughter in the gates, in the long night watches on the towers, with whirring sword strokes that clove bucklers and peaked helmets, that cleft spines and severed necks and limbs and shattered skulls, by the casting down of scaling ladders when the clinging Turks howled as they crashed to their death, and their comrades cried out at the terrible strength in the Franks' naked hands. But the rams crunched, the arrows sang, the steel tide surged on again and again, and the haggard defenders dropped one by one, until only a skeleton force held the crumbling walls of Jabba Khalat. Now, you can't see, but up here there's my big Tolkien collection. Tolkien shied clear of battlefield descriptions. I mean, he did them very well. Howard revels in it, and he's very, very good. The second story is called The Sowers of the Thunder, and we have another exile living and fighting in the Middle East. He's a Gael, he's an Irishman, former king of Ireland called Cael O'Donnell. And this is a man who's been betrayed by a woman and has fled his native island to seek death or glory in the Crusades. I think what's really apparent about in this story as well, in particular, but it's threaded throughout these four tales in this book, is not only Howard's mastery of prose, but his deep knowledge of history and how he weaves that into the story without overloading it with information. He just weaves these pieces in, which really tell you something about the picture of the place, how it looks, how it feels, what's happening generally. But again, this has a great resolution as well. And what page am I looking for? 84. Once again, it's battle. Listen to this. So this is describing a great sort of conflagration of conflict. The long lances of the Templars ripped their foremost line to shreds, and the great charges of the Crusaders overthrew horse and rider. Close on the heels of the warrior monks thundered the rest of the Christian host, swords flashing. Dazed in their turn, the wild riders in their wolfskins reeled backward, howling and plying their deadly blades. But the long swords of the Europeans hacked through iron mesh and steel plate to split skulls and bosoms. Squat corpses choked the ground under their horses' hooves, as deep into the heart of the disorganized horde the knights slashed, and the yells of the tribesmen changed to howls of dismay as the whole battle mass surged backward. And goes on like that. It's just brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. The third tale in the collection is The Lord of Samarkand, and this deals with the character called Tamerlane, or Timur the Lame, and yet another one of Howard's exiled Gaels. So the dispossessed Gael in this story is a Scot named Donald Macdisa. Now Macdisa is keen to get his revenge on the Ottoman Empire and joins up with Tamerlane, or Timur. It becomes part of his forces again as a sellsword. And there's a whole convoluted plot about how Tamerlane lures out the Ottoman Emperor to battle and to basically attempt to bring down the empire itself. So what we have is intrigue, hubris, and bloody revenge, basically, which is a rip-roaring kind of tale of lost love, of vengeance, and again, a nemesis. Cracking story. So the final story, The Shadow of the Vulture, is set in the 16th century Ottoman Empire. And our main character is a German knight this time. And he's introduced when a group of Austrian envoys are attempting to negotiate with Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan of the whole Ottoman Empire. And they've been imprisoned and they're allowed to leave eventually. And our main character, Gottfried von Kalmbach, had had enough of all this kind of intrigue, and he just wants to have a drink and, in a sort of Howardian, wild way of just celebrating women and drink and so on, and goes off. But he's got a price on his head now. He's been recognized, and in an earlier battle, apparently when Suleiman was a younger man, he'd been scarred in battle, and he recognized that it was von Kalmbach was the man who'd injured him. So he puts a bounty on his head, and that's how the story proceeds. So von Kalmbach eventually ends up in Vienna during the siege of that city, which broke the Ottoman advance into Europe. Again, Howard, in some ways, plays fast and loose with history, but weaves in the facts, so it becomes believable. And his prose, again, I keep saying the same thing. I knew that when I did this, I would more or less say Howard's prose, but it's magnificent again. It's a great story. It also introduces the character of Red Sonja, which I believe Marvel Comics later turned into the female sword and sorcery character who was contemporaneous with Conan. But this Red Sonja is in the 16th century. But if you listen to her description, I think you'll find the synergies with the later character that was developed. So the final reading from page 149, and we are introduced to Red Sonja. On a gun turret on the threatened wall, leaning on his great sword and meditatively twisting his moustache, Gottfried von Kalmbach watched a Transylvanian gunner being carried off the wall, his brains oozing from a hole in his head. A Turkish matchlock had spoken too near the walls. The field pieces of the Sultan were barking like deep-toned dogs, knocking chips off the battlements. The Janissaries were advancing, kneeling, firing, reloading as they came on. Bullets glanced from the crenelles and whined off venomously into space. One flattened against Gottfried's hauberk, bringing an outraged grunt from him. Turning towards the abandoned gun, he saw a colourful, incongruous figure bending over the massive breech. It was a woman, dressed as von Kalmbach had not even seen the dandies of France dressed. She was tall, splendidly shaped, but lithe. From under a steel cap escaped rebellious tresses that rippled red gold in the sun over her compact shoulders. High boots of Cordovan leather came to her mid-thighs, which were cased in baggy breeches. She wore a shirt of fine Turkish meshmail tucked into her breeches. Her supple waist was confined by a flowing sash of green silk, into which were thrust a brace of pistols and a dagger, and from which depended a long Hungarian sabre. Over all was carelessly thrown a scarlet cloak. So that's Sowers of the Thunder. It's 5-star, I suppose, in any kind of 5 out of 5 in terms of any kind of calibration of ranking. Brilliant. If you like Howard and you haven't read these 4 stories, highly recommend them. I read them in an afternoon and it was a joy. Well, thank you, folks. That's the end of might be my only YouTube video. But thank you to all 3 of you for watching. And I will, at some point, do a talk. I'm fiddling with my own books over here about these. My own, because I'm also a writer. But I'm not exhausted from the camera.